The last shot still echoed in my ears, mixed with the constant buzz of the base generator. I clutched my rifle to my chest, my knuckles white with tension. Cold sweat ran down my back despite the chilly night air. A movement on the edge of the spotlight made me spin around, my heart pounding like a war drum. Nothing, just the elongated shadow of a twisted, grotesque watchtower under the full moon. "Come on, Ramirez, calm down," I murmured, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "It's just nerves. This is your first night watch on this damn base." But the words didn't dispel the knot of terror lodged in my stomach. Since my arrival at this remote desert facility, an unsettling feeling had gnawed at me. The other soldiers whispered about strange occurrences, shadows moving in the dark, muffled screams coming from the abandoned barracks. I shook my head, trying to push those thoughts away. They were just superstitions, stories to scare the rookies. Even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent lurked in the darkness, something watching and waiting. The sound of footsteps made me tense up. I turned my rifle again, ready. A figure emerged from the gloom, the face hidden under the shadow of a military cap. "Who goes there?" I shouted, my voice rough with fear. The figure stopped, and a guttural laugh broke the silence. It was an inhuman sound, full of malice and mockery. A shiver ran down my spine. "It's me, Ramirez," said the figure, the voice distorted and spectral. "I've come to keep you company." The figure stepped into the light, and I could see his face in the moonlight. It was Sergeant Lopez, a battle-hardened veteran. But there was something different about him, something sinister and unnatural. His eyes glowed with a red light, and a macabre smile spread across his face. I stepped back, terror taking hold of me. "Get away from me, monster!" I shouted, pointing my rifle at him. Lopez stopped, the smile turning into a sneer. "Don't be afraid, Ramirez," he said mockingly. "I just want to show you the truth." He extended a hand towards me, and a red light flashed from his palm. I felt an invisible force pulling me towards him, as if caught in a web. I struggled to break free, but it was useless. "Don't resist, Ramirez," Lopez whispered in my ear. "Join us. The darkness awaits." The red light enveloped me, and I felt my mind disintegrate. Grotesque images and terrifying sounds flooded my senses. I saw mutilated soldiers, their bodies twisted in impossible postures. I heard screams of agony and demonic laughter. Suddenly the red light vanished, and I found myself back in the watchtower. Lopez was gone. I leaned against the railing, trembling and nauseous. "What the hell was that?" I murmured, my voice breaking. I looked around for any explanation, but all I found was the impenetrable and threatening darkness. I spent the rest of the watch in a constant state of terror. Every shadow, every creak made me jump and point my rifle. By dawn, I was exhausted and on the verge of collapse. When the relief soldier arrived, I could barely speak. I muttered something about an apparition and fled the tower, desperate to escape that cursed place. I ran through the base, ignoring the stares of the other soldiers. I reached my barracks and locked myself inside, trembling and sobbing. I couldn't sleep all night. The images of Lopez's apparition and the visions of hell haunted me. The next day, I went to the base doctor, hoping he could help me. But the doctor looked at me skeptically and prescribed tranquilizers. He said I was suffering from post-traumatic stress and needed rest. I didn't believe him. I knew what I had seen was real, that something evil was lurking on that base. But no one believed me. They treated me as if I were crazy. I decided to investigate on my own. I started talking to the other soldiers, looking for someone who had experienced similar things. I discovered I wasn't alone. Other soldiers had seen shadows, heard voices, and felt strange presences. Some had even disappeared without a trace. The more I investigated, the more convinced I became that the base was cursed. There was something dark and powerful that fed on the soldiers' fear and suffering. I decided I had to do something. I couldn't let that malevolent entity keep tormenting my comrades. I gathered a group of soldiers who shared my suspicions. Together, we planned to investigate the abandoned barracks, where paranormal activity was said to be most intense. One night, armed with flashlights and rifles, we ventured into the barracks. The air was thick and oppressive, and a smell of damp and rot permeated the environment. We moved through the dark corridors, lighting the walls with our flashlights. Shadows danced around us, and the silence was broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the pounding of our hearts. We reached a large room where the disappearances were said to have occurred. The air was even heavier here, and an unnatural cold enveloped us. Suddenly the flashlight beams flickered and went out. We were plunged into absolute darkness and silence. Then we heard a sound. It was a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from the walls. We looked at each other, terror reflected in our faces. We pointed our rifles into the darkness, ready for whatever might come. The moan grew louder, and we heard other sounds. Macabre laughter, cries of pain, the clanking of chains. The walls began to tremble, and the floor cracked beneath our feet. We felt something malevolent approaching, something that wanted to devour us. We fired our weapons into the darkness, but the bullets seemed to have no effect. The sound of gunfire mixed with the screams and laughter, creating a cacophony of terror. Suddenly, a red light flooded the room. It was the same light I had seen in Lopez's eyes, the light of the malevolent entity. The light blinded us, and we felt an invisible force pulling us towards it. We struggled to break free, but it was useless. The red light enveloped us completely, and we felt our minds disintegrating. When I woke up, I was in my barracks, sweating and trembling. The other soldiers who had entered the barracks with me were by my side, equally terrified and confused. We couldn't remember anything that had happened after the lights went out. It was as if we had been erased from existence for a time. We knew we had to escape that base, that we were in grave danger, but we couldn't leave without warning the others. We decided to write a detailed report of our experiences and send it to the military command. We hoped they would believe us and send someone to investigate, but we received no response. Our superiors ignored our warnings, treating us as if we were crazy. Desperate, we decided to desert. We left the base in the middle of the night, taking only the essentials. We fled through the desert, guided by the stars. We knew we were being pursued, but we didn't stop. After days of walking, we reached a small town. There we found refuge and help. Over time, the physical and emotional wounds began to heal. But we never forgot what we experienced on that cursed base. The malevolent entity is still there, waiting for its next victim, and we remain its witnesses, the ones who know the truth. It was a night like any other during our deployment in that inhospitable desert, a routine convoy transporting supplies to a forward base. I, Sergeant Major Rodriguez, led the operation. Next to me was Lieutenant Garcia, a young officer full of energy and ambition. Behind us, a line of armored vehicles transporting our brave soldiers. The night was dark, with no moon or stars. Only the light of our headlights cut through the infinite blackness. The silence was absolute, broken only by the roar of the engines and the crunch of sand under the wheels. Suddenly, without warning, all hell broke loose. A blinding flash lit up the night sky. A deafening explosion shook the ground. The first vehicle in the convoy was hit directly, turning into a ball of fire. "Ambush!" I shouted, my voice barely audible above the chaos. "Everyone take cover." But it was already too late. The invisible enemy in the darkness had surrounded us. Bursts of automatic fire raked our vehicles. Cries of pain and terror filled the air. "Garcia!" I shouted. "Organize the defense. I'll try to contact the base." I dived out of the vehicle, rolling in the sand to avoid the bullets. I pulled out my radio and began transmitting a distress signal. "Mayday! Mayday! Convoy Alpha under attack. We need immediate reinforcements." But the radio only emitted static. The signal was jammed. We were alone. I crawled to a sand mound, using my rifle for support. I looked around, trying to assess the situation. The convoy vehicles burned like funeral torches. The bodies of my comrades lay scattered on the ground, motionless. Some still moved, writhing in pain. The enemy kept firing, but I couldn't see them. They were shadows in the dark, ghosts stalking us from the shadows. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. A tall man dressed in a black uniform and a visor helmet. He held an assault rifle in his hands and had a look of hatred in his eyes. I aimed my rifle and fired. The man fell to the ground, but another immediately took his place, and then another, and another. There were too many, too strong, too fast. I was forced to retreat, seeking refuge behind an overturned vehicle. I reloaded my rifle and kept firing, but my bullets seemed to have no effect. I felt a sharp pain in my leg. I looked down and saw that a bullet had pierced my thigh. Blood poured out, staining the sand red. I applied an improvised tourniquet and crawled inside the overturned vehicle. I stayed there, hidden in the dark, waiting for my fate. I could hear the enemy's footsteps approaching. I could feel their hot breath on my neck. I closed my eyes and prepared for the worst. But the final blow never came. Instead, I heard a deafening roar, a sound that chilled my blood, a sound I will never forget. It was the sound of something inhuman. I opened my eyes and saw a scene that defied all logic. The enemy was being massacred, torn apart, destroyed. A gigantic creature towered over them, a dark silhouette against the night sky. It had the shape of a man, but was much bigger, much stronger. Its eyes glowed with an infernal red light. Its claws were as sharp as blades. Its teeth were blood-stained fangs. The enemy soldiers screamed in terror, but their cries were drowned out by the beast's roars. They tried to flee, but were caught and torn apart like rag dolls. The creature moved with supernatural speed and agility. It jumped from side to side, dodging bullets and explosions. Its claws tore through flesh and metal with equal ease. I watched as it lifted a soldier into the air and ripped him in two with its bare hands. I saw it bite off another's head. I saw it crush a third underfoot. It was a slaughter, a bloodbath, hell on earth. The creature kept killing until no one was left alive. Then it turned to me, its red eyes fixed on mine. I felt paralyzing terror. I knew my time had come, but the creature didn't attack me. Instead, it approached slowly, its steps echoing in the sand. It stopped in front of the overturned vehicle and leaned towards me. I could feel its hot breath on my face. I could smell the stench of blood and death emanating from its body. I closed my eyes and waited for the final blow, but it never came. Instead, I heard a guttural sound, like a growl. Then the creature moved away and disappeared into the darkness. I stayed there, trembling with fear and shock, until reinforcements arrived. They took me to a field hospital where they treated my bullet wound and gave me a blood transfusion. When I recovered, they interrogated me about what had happened. I told them everything I had seen, but they didn't believe me. They said I was delirious from fever and blood loss. They discharged me from the army with honors, but with a mentally disturbed label. No one wanted to know about me. No one wanted to hear my story. Now, years later, I am still haunted by the memories of that night. I still see the creature's red eyes in my nightmares. I still hear its roars in my ears. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know where it came from or why it attacked us, but I know it was real, and I know I will never forget it. My name is Captain David Ramirez, and this is the story of how my Special Forces team faced indescribable horrors on a mission that pushed us to the brink of sanity. It all began with an emergency call in the middle of the night, a desperate plea that would launch us into a devastated war zone. Looking back, I remember the sepulchral silence of the base as we prepared for the mission. Each of us, veterans hardened by 1,000 battles, knew this time would be different. The tension was palpable, thick, and suffocating. "Ramirez, are you ready?" asked Sergeant Major Garcia, his grave voice resonating in the darkness. "Always ready, Sergeant Major," I replied, adjusting my bulletproof vest. "This mission stinks of rot," Garcia muttered, shaking his head. "Something doesn't add up." His words echoed in my mind as we boarded the helicopter, the roar of the rotors drowning out any other thoughts. We landed in what was once a prosperous city, now reduced to rubble and ruins. The stench of death and destruction filled the air as the wind howled between the bombed-out buildings. "Damn, this looks like the end of the world," said Corporal Rodriguez, his voice trembling. "Maintain formation and keep your eyes open," I ordered, my heart pounding. We advanced cautiously, every creak of twisted metal and every elongated shadow feeding our paranoia. The streets were deserted, except for the putrefied corpses scattered like macabre offerings. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream broke the silence, followed by a burst of gunfire. We ran toward the sound, finding Lieutenant Mendoza huddled in a corner, his face pale and contorted. "What the hell happened?" I asked, pointing my rifle toward the shadows. Something attacked us," Mendoza stammered, pointing to a dark alley. "They weren't human." My men and I exchanged incredulous looks. What kind of enemy stalked us in this hell? We decided to investigate the alley, advancing with our weapons ready. The darkness was so thick we could barely see our own hands. Suddenly, a grotesque figure emerged from the shadows, its body deformed and its eyes glowing with a sickly light. "Fire!" I shouted, emptying my magazine into the creature. The figure collapsed, but within seconds more emerged from the darkness, their sharp claws and rotting teeth glinting in the moonlight. We were surrounded. We found ourselves in a frenetic battle, firing and dodging the creature's attacks. Their bodies seemed immune to bullets, and their guttural screams chilled our blood. "Damn it, we can't handle them," shouted Sergeant Garcia as one of the creatures tore off his arm. Desperation took hold of us, but we kept fighting tooth and nail. One by one, my men fell, their bodies mutilated by the creature's claws and teeth. I found myself cornered in a dead-end alley, my ammunition exhausted and my body covered in wounds. One of the creatures lunged at me, its jaws wide open. I closed my eyes, awaiting the final blow, but it never came. I opened my eyes and saw Mendoza, his face covered in blood, wielding a bloody knife. He had stabbed the creature in the heart, saving my life. "Run, Ramirez!" Mendoza shouted as more creatures approached. "Run and don't look back." I obeyed, running through the devastated streets, the echoes of screams and gunfire chasing me. I didn't stop until I reached the extraction point where a helicopter awaited us. I climbed aboard, exhausted and traumatized. I looked back, seeing the city in flames, a hell on earth. We returned to the base, but none of us were the same. We had seen horrors no human should witness. The nightmares tormented us, the memories of the battle etched into our minds. Mendoza didn't survive his wounds, but his sacrifice allowed us to escape hell. We buried him with military honors, a fallen hero in a war against the unknown. Years later, I still hear the screams of my men, the crunch of broken bones and the stench of death. The physical scars have healed, but the emotional wounds remain open. The crackle of the campfire brings me back to the present, to the cabin in the mountains where I've hidden from the world. The flames dance in the darkness, casting shadows that blend with memories. A decade has passed, but the stench of burnt flesh and the echo of piercing screams still haunt me. I can't escape the island. We were the elite unit, the Ghosts, 12 soldiers selected for our skills and our ability to operate in the shadows. We were sent to Leech Island, a forgotten piece of land in the Pacific, for a training exercise. We were supposed to simulate an infiltration and secure an unknown objective. It seemed routine, but from the start, something felt wrong. The boat approached the shore under the full moon. The sound of waves breaking against the rocks was the only noise breaking the silence. We slid into the water and crawled across the sand to the tree line. The air was dense and humid, filled with the smell of salt and decay. "Stay alert," whispered Captain Ramirez. "We don't know what to expect." We advanced through the undergrowth, our rifles ready. The trees were tall and twisted, their branches intertwining to form an impenetrable canopy. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the beam of our flashlights. After hours of marching, we reached a clearing. In the center was a concrete structure, half hidden by vegetation. A rusty steel door blocked the entrance. "This wasn't in the reports," said Sergeant Major Mendoza. We forced the door open and entered. The interior was a labyrinth of dark corridors and empty rooms. The air was cold and stale, with a metallic smell that turned my stomach. In one of the rooms, we found an operating table stained with blood. Beside it was a container full of rusty surgical instruments. "This looks like a field hospital," said the unit's medic, Lieutenant Gomez. "But there are no patients," I replied. We continued exploring, each step taking us deeper into the nightmare. We found empty cages, broken test tubes, and notes scribbled in a language we couldn't understand. In the lower level, we discovered a refrigeration chamber. The door was open, revealing a scene that froze our blood. There were bodies, dozens of them, piled on top of each other, naked and mutilated. Some had exposed organs, others were missing limbs. All had expressions of horror frozen on their faces. "My God," murmured Captain Ramirez. "This isn't a hospital," said Sergeant Major Mendoza. "It's a slaughterhouse." In a control room, we found a computer that still worked. We accessed the files and discovered the truth. Leech Island wasn't a training base. It was a secret laboratory wherein human experiments were conducted on human beings. The subjects were prisoners of war, criminals, and missing persons. They were subjected to torture, mutilation, and genetic experiments. The results were monstrosities that barely resembled humans. "These bastards," growled Captain Ramirez. "We have to get out of here and tell the world what's happening," I said. But it was too late. The doors locked, the lights went out, and the alarms began to sound. We were trapped. We were attacked by the creatures they had created. They were fast, strong, and brutal. We killed many, but there were too many. We lost Gomez and 2 of our men. We managed to escape the base, but the entire island seemed to be against us. They chased us through the jungle, attacked us on the beach. We lost 2 more men. In the end, only 6 of us remained, wounded, traumatized, but alive. We were rescued by a fishing boat that found us adrift on an improvised raft. We returned home, but we weren't the same. We were marked by what we had seen and done. The government silenced us, erased us from the records. We became ghosts. Some of us died under mysterious circumstances. Others disappeared without a trace. I hid, trying to forget, but I can't. The island haunts me. The screams torment me. I know I can't keep running. I have to tell the truth. I write this as a testimony, as a warning. Leech Island is not just a memory, it's a threat. The experiments continue. The creatures are still out there. I don't know if anyone will believe me. I don't know if I can stop them, but I have to try. For those who died, for those who still suffer, for humanity. The campfire dies out. The darkness surrounds me. But I know I'm not alone. The ghosts of Leech Island are with me, and together we will fight for the truth. "We should never have gone in there," Sergeant Ramirez repeated over and over, his voice trembling and his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the campfire. We were a group of soldiers gathered around the fire, our faces pale and contorted, reflecting the horror we had witnessed that night. It all began as a simple training exercise. We were a platoon of 20 men sent to a remote, wooded area to simulate a nighttime combat scenario. The darkness was impenetrable, broken only by the faint glow of our flashlights and the crunch of leaves under our boots. In the midst of the chaos and confusion of the exercise, I got separated from the group. I stumbled upon a half-buried bunker, its entrance blocked by branches and undergrowth. Curiosity got the better of my judgment, and I pushed the rusty door open. The interior of the bunker was a world of shadows and silence. The air was dense and humid, with a smell of mold and decay that turned my stomach. I turned on my flashlight and cautiously advanced, my steps echoing in the void. The walls were covered in graffiti and strange symbols, some too disturbing to describe. There were rusted bunks, overturned tables, and abandoned military equipment scattered on the floor. As I explored the bunker, I came across a locked door. I forced the lock with the butt of my rifle and entered a small, dark room. What I saw there froze my blood. In the center of the room was an improvised operating table stained with dried blood. On it lay rusty surgical instruments and blood-soaked rags. In a corner, a pile of human bones stood like a macabre monument. I stepped back in horror, but it was too late. The door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. I heard a metallic noise behind me and turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a tall, thin man dressed in a tattered military uniform. His skin was pale and waxy, his eyes sunken and hollow. He held a bloody scalpel in his hand. "Welcome to my laboratory," he said in a hoarse, guttural voice. "I've been waiting for a new test subject." I tried to scream, but fear paralyzed me. The man approached, his scalpel gleaming in the moonlight that filtered through a crack in the ceiling. I closed my eyes and waited for the inevitable. But the attack never came. Instead, I heard a blood-curdling scream followed by a thud. I opened my eyes and saw the man convulsing on the floor. Beside him stood Sergeant Ramirez, clutching his combat knife. "Let's get out of here," Ramirez shouted, grabbing my arm and dragging me out of the room. We ran through the bunker, our hearts pounding. We emerged into the forest and regrouped with the rest of the platoon. We told them what we had seen, but they didn't believe us. They thought we were crazy or hallucinating from the stress of the exercise. But we knew the truth. We had seen the horror with our own eyes. and we knew we would never forget that night in the abandoned bunker. We returned to the base, but the nightmare didn't end there. Sergeant Ramirez began having terrible nightmares and showing signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. He was discharged from the Army, and no one ever heard from him again. I also struggled with the demons of that night. The memories of the bunker, the man with the scalpel, and the pile of human bones haunted me. I sought psychological help, but nothing seemed to ease my pain. Over time, I learned to live with my demons, but I never forgot what I saw in that abandoned bunker, and I know I will never be the same. Now, years later, I'm still tormented by unanswered questions. Who was that man with the scalpel? What experiments was he conducting in that bunker? And what happened to Sergeant Ramirez? I may never know the answers. But one thing is certain. I will never forget the horror I witnessed that night. And I will always remember Sergeant Ramirez's words. We should never have gone in there.